You have questions? We have answers. Welcome to the Therapist Question Box with your host, Miss Lindsay Schiss.
Welcome back to another episode of the Therapist Question Box. We are excited to have you with us today. We are here to answer your toughest questions, so don't be afraid to ask. Today I have with me Lauren Claus, who is a therapist at Therapy Utah. And before we start, Lauren, can you introduce us to the listeners that haven't met you yet?
Yes. Hi, everybody. My name is Lauren. I have been working at Therapy Utah for a little over 2 years now, and I'm super excited to be back.
Awesome. Well, we love having you at Therapy Utah and are so happy to have you on the podcast. Thanks for joining us. So today it is Thanksgiving. It's a week of Thanksgiving. So happy Thanksgiving to everybody. Lauren, what are you doing for Thanksgiving?
I am hanging out with friends, so it's good. Last year, I kind of was a little bit more alone because we just moved out to Utah. So now we get to expand and do like Friendsgiving. So I'm super excited about it.
Nice. That's awesome. Tell our listeners where you're from.
I'm from Southern Connecticut.
Okay. And been in Utah how long?
A little over 2 years.
And why Utah, of all places?
Such a great question. Honestly, I knew somebody that had lived out here. I visited. I was taken away with the beauty of Utah. I didn't realize Utah was so pretty. I didn't know what to expect. I'm big into outdoors, skiing, snowboarding, hiking. And so it just seemed like the perfect match, honestly.
Yeah. I love it. And has it been what you expected?
Totally, for sure.
It's been good.
Yeah.
It's awesome. I'm a fan of Utah, but I'm from here. But yeah, if you're an outdoors person, I don't know that there's a better place. It's kind of awesome. Yeah, it's the best. So, well, again, happy Thanksgiving to everybody. We really wanted to talk about the holidays and how the holidays can be such a wonderful time, but also can be a really stressful time. And so we'll just launch into our listener question today about some of the challenges that can be faced during the holiday season. So here's the question. The holidays are supposed to be joyful, but I often feel overwhelmed by family dynamics, financial stress, and expectations. How can I take care of myself and still enjoy the season? I don't think this person is alone in their question. I think this is a question a lot of us feel, and a lot of us feel complex emotions. Lauren, what are your initial thoughts when you hear that question?
It's so realistic and so valid. It's you either love the holidays or you hate them or both. And I think, at least for me, speaking for myself, it's such a joyous time, but it does come with a lot of stress and wanting to make sure you have family time included and also taking time for self-care and putting your needs first. It can be a really tough situation, especially if you don't have the healthiest family dynamic or you're maybe living out of state like myself. And really just on social media, they always talk about the joys of holidays and to buy this and to buy that. And everyone's situation looks a little bit different. And so I don't even think there's just expectations around family, but also like societal and social media expectations about what your holidays should look like and what your house should look like and what you should be buying and eating and cooking. There's so much to it.
That's such a good point, that this is not just about family dynamics. There's pressure from everywhere, right? When I think about that, I think you're saying societal expectations, there's financial strain, right? There is and then just personal, like how much energy do I have to give to these events and these people and everything like that. So I can see how these could really lead to burnout. So I would love if you could start with just a practical tip that you could say, okay, it's Thanksgiving week, I'm going to Thanksgiving with family. It could be some tricky dynamics. What tip would you give our listeners?
What is in my control and what's out of my control? Sounds so basic, so simple, and almost like a little cheesy, I guess. But I almost would love if we can practice being realistic with ourselves. When it comes to expectations, we always have this, I have to do the best I can, or I have to be perfect. I have to, show up, and holidays need to be joyful and there can be no stress or sadness. And that makes us almost have to stuff everything down that have been building for the past year so that we can have a joyous holiday. And that means a lot of the time we're neglecting ourselves, our emotions, our mindset, stressing about taking off from work and, avoiding all of that. And I think a lot of times we forget, what do I actually have control over in this situation? If I walk into a Thanksgiving dinner knowing I have an okay family situation, like I get along with everybody, but I don't feel super connected to my family group or dynamic at this time, what is in my control? What could I do, right, to help that process? And then what can I also let go of and take maybe some expectations away to ease my anxiety and my stress?
So I love that idea of what is in my control and what isn't. And I think some of our pain and our frustration comes from trying to control things that are not ours to control.
Yes.
I think we have all been in that place where we think, oh, but I can't say this because this will be their response. Well, actually, their response is not your business. You don't have control of that, right? And so really getting clear on that, I think, is such a great perspective. The other thing you said is just, what can you accept, right? What is okay? And what can you, and as I hear that, I think radical acceptance, right? Radical acceptance is sometimes really challenging to say, you know what, my family dynamic may not be what I want. This relationship may be difficult. And yeah, there's going to be a spotlight on it today or during the holidays. And how do I accept that, right? Not to accept it forever and ever, amen, but to say, right now in this moment, is this the time to really grind out all the family issues, or can I be at this Thanksgiving dinner and actually just enjoy it and maybe table some of those things for a future time?
Totally, 100%. And I think it's a skill that takes a lot of practice, right? This isn't something overnight. I know it's called radical acceptance, and it almost feels like it's an overnight thing. And for part of it, it is, because it can just be a mindset that you simply do just practice in that moment. But it also takes like commitment for that, like to sit at the dinner table and acknowledge, I don't feel safe right now, or I wish things were different, right? Being able to accept, okay, I have very limited control in that, but I'm going to choose to see this differently. I'm going to choose to sit at the table and just acknowledge I'm here for another Thanksgiving. I get to have a family to go home to, right? And then kind of working on exactly what are we grateful for? That's the perfect time to practice radical acceptance, to practice self-compassion, and to practice what's in and out of my control, all with gratitude surrounding it.
Yes. And it sounds like such a nice idea, right? But we have all of those feelings coming up when we're at the table with somebody that we've had a history with, or, there's been a problem that hasn't been cleared up. How do we do that, right? How do we kind of say, you know what? We're not pretending it doesn't exist, but we're saying, you know what, we're going to shelf this for this interaction because this is my goal, right? I want to have a healthy interaction. And when we talk about radical acceptance, there's a reason it's called radical, because it's not easy. It's not something that just comes naturally overnight, no big deal. It's radical because it's hard, right? So as you were talking, it made me think about boundaries can be really helpful, right? I think sometimes boundaries get a bad rap when it comes to family members, but I want you to talk a little bit about how do you think, like, what are some practical tips for setting healthy boundaries with family during the holidays?
Totally. I think, and I love, especially for our listeners that maybe struggle with boundaries, haven't really implemented boundaries before, start off really small. I feel like when we get into this shift of, okay, I have to have boundaries, I have to do this, I have to do that, we almost bite off too much that we can chew, right? Like we are like, oh, I'm just not going to talk to them. I'm not going to make eye contact with them. Like that's my boundary. And it's like, well, how realistic is that? Can we really commit to that, right? To me, a realistic and attainable boundary could be, I'm going to hug them and say hello, but I'm not going to engage in further conversation. If they start off the conversation pleasantly, I will respond pleasantly, but I will not dig into detail. Maybe I will sit a few seats away from them. I won't sit directly next to them. It can be, I think maybe this is for our listeners that have complex relationships with parents, especially boundaries and especially holidays. I feel like that's a big topic that gets brought up during our therapy sessions, is also acknowledging and saying no to your parents, or saying, yes, I can do that, but I need to do this first, right? If no is too hard of a word, but like being realistic in, okay, how could I answer and be supportive and be present in the moment while also putting my needs first? And really, a boundary at the end of the day is something to protect yourself, right? It's what will I do in response to somebody doing something to me? It's not a shutting away, right? It's not a pushback, but it's, hey, I've noticed that this affects me. And so therefore, I'm going to put this in place so that I feel safe and I can be present and I can be here.
I love that. And, as you're talking, it makes me think we're not always announcing our boundaries to the world. In fact, often we aren't. We're just saying, you know what? This is what I know will and won't work for me. So I'm going to honor myself in holding this boundary. I think the other piece that is so critical is what can I be comfortable with, as you were saying that, like what is it that I can show up as my highest and best self, and what do the boundaries look like, right? But I think sometimes we think boundaries are for other people, but they're really for us. We can make requests for other people, but really we hold the boundary. Does that make sense?
100%.
Yeah. And that's something actually that distinction I've just recently really grasped, that I can make a request, say I'm at family dinner and that, my daughter has a new boyfriend, and I can say, you know what? Hey, grandma, can you please not talk about the ex-boyfriend at dinner because the new boyfriend is coming over? That's a request. But the boundary is for me, if the conversation comes up, that I decide how I am and I'm not going to show up. If I'm like, you know what, I actually requested that, so my boundary is I'm choosing not to engage in that conversation. So I really appreciate what you were saying, that really it is understanding what we can do to stay in a healthy place. And they're really for us, right? So again, boundaries are super important, and just recognizing that this time can be difficult. If you think about other stressors that come up around the holidays, what would you say are the things you're hearing from your clients that feel really big and stressful?
Definitely, well, boundaries, of course. Taking off of work, right? So engaging in that self-care of like, it's okay to take off a week from work in between Christmas and New Year's. And personally, that's something I've struggled with, because in our industry, right, we don't necessarily have PTO or like vacation time. It's when we work, we get paid, and we don't. And so like giving yourself the grace of, I deserve a week off. This is okay. I'm going to be around family. I don't have to be accessible to everybody. I need to be accessible to myself. So that I feel like comes up a lot, not just in the therapeutic sense, but just in people's lives of, I don't have to be at work. Like I can be home with my family. I can enjoy that time. I think financial stress is also a huge one, if I didn't say that already, just around the idea of buying gifts, buying a lot of things. There's so much consumption nowadays that it's, well, what if this person doesn't like the present I get them? What if I don't get them something that's valuable enough? What are they going to think? And I think another thing is like seasonal depression. People once again struggle around the holidays. It can be a very confusing, conflicting, stressful time. And then also it's meant to be joyous, and you're meant to have gratitude, and you're meant to feel the beauty in all of it. And when you can have two things exist at once, it's still really conflicting. And so I think having seasonal depression is also impacting people's ability to want to show up as their highest self, or have the motivation, or have the insight to acknowledge, I have seasonal depression. There's something I can do about it. And it also stinks to experience this in a time that's meant to be joyful and fun.
Isn't that the irony, that that's when seasonal depression hits, is during these times, right? When it's supposed to be joyful and fun. And I think you said a really important thing, that it's supposed to be joyful and fun. And when we have these expectations that this should be this wonderful time, and it's a time to gather and to be grateful. And if I don't feel that way, because I might have some seasonal depression, or I might have some grief, or I might have had a loss, or this relationship has transitioned, so I have some really heavy feelings around that, I also have this internal conflict of like, oh gosh, what do I do with that? And so what would you suggest when we're really saying, you know what, I have this expectation. In fact, not just an expectation, but I'd like to have a good time. I'd like to feel connected and close, but I have all these things on my heart or in my mental health that I'm struggling with. What would you suggest to our listeners if that is what they're experiencing?
Take the time to work through what you have to go through. Don't push aside, don't step away just because it's the holidays. Embrace the fact that you have hardships. Embrace the fact that maybe you're going through grief or you're going through transition. Hold your own hand going through it, knowing I know that I can do this. This is going to be hard. And I can also do hard things, and I can enjoy the holiday season if that's something that I choose to do. I think just once again, kind of going back to that radical acceptance of this is a really hard time for me right now. Things have been really rough. And I also can be okay, right?
Yes.
Really rough week. And then I can enjoy being alone and by myself or with friends and family on the weekends, knowing I'm not drowning. Or if we really are drowning, right? Ask for help. I think that's a big thing around the holidays is this, I'm a burden if I ask for help. Once this is a joyous time, I should be enjoying my life. Why should I be struggling or being depressed? I don't want to bring other people down. This is supposed to be a great time of the year. I don't want to be a burden. And for anybody out there that thinks that they are a burden, you're not a burden. You have every single right to feel the way that you do. Your feelings are valid. You get to lean on people for support. That's such a privilege. And if you have that in your grasp, take it. And if you don't, then I encourage you to try and find it.
I really appreciate that reminder that you are not a burden. And I think when people feel that way, what do? We shut down, we disconnect, and then everything feels worse and harder. But to recognize, like, actually, people want to help and they want to know what's going on in your heart and your mind. So, and if you don't feel like you have those people in your life, to seek them out, because that makes such a difference. So I really appreciate that. So one of the things you talked about was self-care, taking time off of work, right? So how do we help protect our mental health while navigating holiday obligations? What does that look like? And I know it's probably different for everybody, but do you have some practical suggestions on how we can navigate and just keep our mental health as, as healthy as we can during some of these difficult times?
I always strive on take time away for yourself, right? So especially if you're in this busy hustle bustle time of year where you're with your family and you have all these people to meet, and maybe you come back for the holidays and it's like, oh my God, it's a family reunion. I have to connect with everybody. Truly make sure that you're also taking some time for you, whether it's just an hour a day, whether it's your morning skincare or just getting ready for the day where you put effort into yourself. Make sure that you also are putting you first in any capacity that feels realistic and attainable. And once again, yes, that looks so different for everybody, but we have to take care of ourselves. So maybe that means making sure that you're exercising. If you consistently exercise throughout the year, keep that going even through the holiday season, right? Journaling can even be helpful. I think trying to meet up with old friends can be really helpful, and also kind of a self-care measure. Make extra time for that, right? Not just for family, but for friends, for people that are important to you in your life that you may feel guilty canceling on a cousin to go see a longtime best friend that you haven't seen in a while. That's fine too. Cancel a cousin. You can reschedule. You can do that again. But really anything that you can do that feels attainable and realistic. And I'm really harping on the attainable and realistic so that it actually gets done, so that it is achieved. We do find success. We give our body the evidence of I can take care of myself in all of these stressful and overwhelming but fun times. I don't know if that's helpful for anybody, but I think it's something that we truly go past and kind of are like, oh yeah, of course we know to take care of ourselves. Do we?
Isn't that true? Do we? Let's ask that question. Yeah. I don't know, because sometimes this is the irony as you're talking. I think, isn't that the irony, is sometimes our self-care routines that help us stay grounded, help us stay emotionally and mentally in a good place, they go out the window because things get stressful, things get busy, whatever. And I think, wow, that's when we need it the most, right? And I worked in the physical fitness industry for a lot. Physical fitness, who called it that anymore? I taught spinning for a lot of years. And so I was in that industry for a long time. And it was interesting because for me, that is such an important thing, to get out, to sweat, to just get some of those endorphins going. And so, like you said, when I'm at family functions, when I'm not, it doesn't matter if I'm traveling, I am I have to get up and move my body. And when I do, I feel so much better. And I can use any excuse in the book, but I also can use all the excuses to say, you know what, I will wake up this much earlier because I feel better throughout the entire day. And so what you're saying is like, don't ditch your routines. If it's something that helps your self-care on a normal day, continue to do it, right? Like, in fact, especially do it during these stressful times. So I love that idea. So tell me if, I think often difficult conversations can come up, right? There can be difficult conversations. There are dynamics that are challenging, and they are all together. So how would you suggest handling difficult conversation or potentially conflicts at holiday gatherings?
This is going to sound, I hope this doesn't come across harsh, but I feel like it will. So viewers, please know that I'm not meaning to have it be harsh. Know your place, right? Like kind of like know, what is my role in this situation, right? So if there's a few family members that don't typically get along, and I think a huge thing is maybe politics are going to get brought up on holidays. That's a huge thing that people get concerned about, is we bring all our family together and we have different political views, or we have different opinions about healthcare or mental health field, right? I think what I hear a lot in sessions is I struggle with my mental health and I feel like my family's not going to get that. And they're going to shame me and guilt me for talking openly about my experience with my own mental health. And it kind of goes back to that, right? Like know your place, stay in your lane of what's in my control, what's out of my control. If we have this expectation of I'm going to go in ready, guns blazing, gonna, totally ignite a fight in the family dynamic, then that likelihood is it's going to happen, right? Like we're going to go, we want our voice to be heard. And I'm all for that. If we also know, what does it look like for my voice to be heard, but in a healthy and respectful way. Right.
And as you're saying that, it makes me think, but is that really what you want out of this? Like getting really clear on that. Like, is my goal to come in here and guns a-blazing, like talk about all of, where I stand and what's going on, versus like, is my goal to connect with my people? And if my goal is to connect, then is that maybe the right venue or the right time to be bringing some of those conversations up? Not that they don't need to be brought up at some other time, but just to consider, like, what is my goal in this interaction? I think that might be helpful in going to the holiday function. What do I want out of this?
Right. And the thing that you can take away from that is, right, and this is where all of the stuff that we've talked about comes back together. Having boundaries, standing your ground, knowing your role, what's in of my control, what's out of my control. And so if your goal is to really connect, or at least just feel seen and heard and valued by your family, right, you can explain that. So if you're having this in-depth conversation and you feel like your perspective isn't being respected, right? Or like you just don't feel like people are listening, it's okay to say, hey, my goal in this is to feel respected and seen just like how I want to do for you. And if that can't be done, then I'm just not going to engage in this conversation. And that makes me really sad, but I also get it. And so feel free to continue the conversation. I'm going to go over here and converse with somebody else. Sounds super easy. It's also really scary and intimidating when we think about doing that. And so it's okay to also not do that perfectly. And I'll be honest, you probably won't do it perfectly, because that's hard to do. Even my heart's like racing thinking about if I have to say that in front of anybody in my family, right? But like, what can you take away from that feels true to you, right? Can you then maybe just walk away from the conversation? Maybe you don't have to say anything, but does walking away still feel genuine and true? Does that feel right? Does that keep you safe? Does saying, oh, I don't really agree, but we can agree to disagree, and then once again, walk away from the conversation, maybe ask to change topics. I think at the end of the day, we have to assess right now, what is my level of safety? How do I feel in this conversation? Is this hurting or helping me? And if it's hurting, do what you need to do in order to walk away. And once again, if your goal isn't to do guns blazing, I'm going to start a fight, right? I'm going to do whatever you want to do. I mean, if you want to do that, great.
I don't know how many of us go to holiday dinners ready to start a fight. I hope we don't.
I hope not. But if that is your goal, then hey, I love that you have passion. Do it, with passion. But I think a lot of us really at the end of the day just want to feel seen and heard, and knowing that even if I feel like my experience, my perspective is different, that I'm still respected in this family. And so if I feel like if that's our main goal, right, know what is going to work for you, and how do you truth, how do you stand up for yourself while also being honest and respectful to other people.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think for me, even as you're saying this and you're like, your heart's racing, I'm feeling that same thing. Like, oh man, I think because we relate to that, right? I remember a conversation I had with my nephew several years ago, and it changed my perspective around this. He just said, and we were going to a reunion of sorts, and I was talking to him about going and anticipating it. And he just said, well, why do you think you're going to change the perspectives of these people? And why do you think that, what makes you think that? And why do you think it's your job to? And it really just
So
gave
wise.
me, right? This is from my nephew. And it just gave me a moment of pause. Like, why have I put myself in that situation? And honestly, that conversation gave me pause, but it also gave me this, like, you know what? That's actually not what I want out of this. I don't want to try to change perspectives and come in. Like, I actually just want to be there. I want to, like you said, feel seen and heard, but I don't want to change. It's not working. It hasn't worked for lots of years. So what am I doing? And honestly, it was like I had permission to just show up and enjoy myself. And I felt like I was honoring myself because my goal was really clear. I wanted to have connection, and I wanted to do it in a way that would promote feelings, like good feelings between everyone. And so, yes, it was so wise, and it actually changed the way I have interacted from there on out. So I really appreciated that perspective.
That's such a good, I love that. They're so wise, and I'm sure good for them. They're a force to be reckoned with in this world if they're knowing that wisdom at such an early age. I think like my goal all the time when I go into family situations is to be the bright light that I know that I am, right? So I know what that takes. I know what my boundaries are with that. I know how I respond and how I react. And of course, this has gotten easier as I've aged and I've been a therapist myself, right? And so I'm doing my own work. But like, I know my self-worth. I know the level of like self-respect I have. I know the love that I have for myself. And so I totally agree. It's not my job to change how somebody thinks. I can converse, I can offer my perspective. And if they take it, they do. And that's great. And if they don't, that's also okay, because that is their choice. They have self-autonomy. They have self-determination. It's not my job to make sure somebody is on my side. If they are, great. And if they aren't, we can still be friends. We can still respect one another. And whether or not everybody that's listening disagrees, once again, that's also fine. You get to decide that for yourself. And that's kind of the beautiful thing about it is we're all different. We